Coronavirus, also known as COVID-19, ravages the world, creating panic and inflicting economic hardship. Experts are warning that its effect on the domestic and global economy may be worse than envisaged.
Indeed, with President Muhammadu Buhari's announcement of an initial 14-day lockdown in Lagos, Ogun, and the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja, as part of precautionary measures to contain further spread of the coronavirus, the lockdown announced by the President is expected to begin 11 p.m. today. The news comes as the latest number of confirmed cases in the country rises to 111.
Joining us now is Dr. Andrew Nevin, partner and Chief Economist, PriceWaterhouseCooper Nigeria, that's PwC. He'll be helping us to assess the likely and manifest effect of coronavirus on the global economy with a special focus on Nigeria, where he is domiciled. It's a joy having you, Andrew. Andrew, let's make sense of it. The world is in lockdown mode as we speak. There's something called the Purchasing Managers Index that shows how viable manufacturing economies are doing. The limit is normally 50.1, but now it is less than 50.1. In fact, it's 47.5 for Germany, France, and the likes. It shows that manufacturing is not going on in the world. What is happening, Andrew?
Well, effectively, we've never seen anything like this. What we've had is, let's call it a demand shock, where demand collapses for everything. Obviously for airlines, for hotels, anything related to tourism. People are not buying physical goods right now. People are locked down in their home. All they're buying are the basic necessities of food. They're buying Netflix in developed countries, et cetera. And the net result is just a contraction of the economy like we've never seen. And at the beginning of this, I think economists were very slow to pick up on the magnitude of it, but now I think they largely recognize it. The numbers we're talking about are a contraction in the second quarter versus a year ago of something like 10 to 15% in economies like the US, like the UK, perhaps in China as well, though it's hard to tell. That number is extraordinary. The Great Depression in the United States never got to about a 10% contraction. So for this to happen from quarter one in one single quarter to quarter two is totally unprecedented.
Well, Andrew, let's talk specifically Nigeria now. We've seen broad measures taken by the CBN here in Nigeria, covering a number of sectors, households, small and medium-scale enterprises. Then we saw the president's speech yesterday. Do you think that these are far-reaching enough stimulus? What else could have been done, in your own opinion?
Well, I think, first off, I think the CBN and the Ministry of Finance have been very quick off the mark in Nigeria to start to react to this. They recognize that they need to take action. There's been bold action around the world. We need bold action here. But we have a couple of challenges in Nigeria. Obviously, the collapse in oil price essentially means that the flow of dollars or foreign exchange from oil has gone to zero. And that's going to put tremendous fiscal pressure on both the federal government, but also all the state governments almost immediately. The other challenge we have, we have a health challenge, but because of the lockdown, we've had a massive spike in unemployment, particularly informal employment, people who are working effectively day to day, and their incomes are collapsed. So those are real challenges for us. Obviously, the CBN is trying to react to it. But I think from our perspective, what we've been saying is the number one thing is for the federal government to look for sources of money outside of Nigeria to support us. If you look at what's happened, UK government, US government, other European Union have all had massive fiscal support in their countries. Nigeria doesn't have the same kind of fiscal room. We need support from people like the IMF, the World Bank, Afro-Exim Bank, et cetera, just to stabilize the situation in the short term. But I know that the Minister of Finance and the CBN are working very hard on that. I think the second thing, though, that's critical is what do we do with the people who've suddenly been thrown into unemployment and the bottom of the pyramid who are not able to earn their daily living? There needs to be a mechanism where we get cash into the hands of the bottom of the pyramid in Nigeria. So we need really two things: cash into the hands of the bottom of the pyramid, and we need to keep, despite all the things going on, the food supply chain has to work. And those are the two most critical things in Nigeria beyond the health issues around COVID-19.
All right, Andrew, real quickly, you talked about looking for alternative sources of money apart from what we can get in Nigeria. I'd like to bring in the big elephant in the room. IMF has put 150 billion US down and say any country that wants the money for COVID should come take it. Should we take it or should we not take it?
We should take it. I mean, this is not the time. I don't think the IMF is here to impose dramatic structural changes that may not be helpful. They recognize this is a global crisis. They recognize that some countries don't have the same fiscal room as other countries, and we're in that position. Ghana's already gone. It's publicly announced that Ghana's gone to the IMF and asked for support. I don't think there's anything wrong at this point in time in Nigeria asking for support. I think the other thing, though, that we should be doing is we have, of course, the massive diaspora flow into Nigeria. It supports millions of Nigerians with their education, with with food, with healthcare, and there's a concern, of course, as the economies contract in U.S., U.K., elsewhere, that diaspora flow shrinks. I think it's very important that people here supported by the diaspora send a message to the diaspora, please keep supporting us. We need part of that here. So in the United States, people are going to get a check from the federal government to help them through that position. If you're part of the diaspora who's traditionally sent money to Nigeria, please, we should be encouraging the diaspora to continue to send money to the extent that they can to support us, because we can't have the oil flow dry up, the diaspora flow dry up, both at the same time.
Well, Andrew, please weigh in on this debate and conversation. Many African countries here are crying out for debt relief to weather the storm of coronavirus. But there are some analysts who say, you need to ease on those borrowings at this time. What do you have to say?
You mean the analysts are saying that we shouldn't be asking for debt relief?
There are some who say debt relief would help African countries weather the storm of coronavirus. But there are those who say, don't even look at borrowing more. You are saying we should go for that loan, we should go for more money. But there are those who argue we should ease on that front for now.
Well, I think the African countries should be asking for debt relief. I mean, if you've looked, as I said, this is an unprecedented situation. It's unprecedented in the health challenge. It's unprecedented in the economic challenge. It calls for bold action. And you've had, of course, in developed countries, you have many industries, the airline industry, the hotel industry, restaurant industry, all asking for support for them to get through it. I don't think there's anything wrong with African countries asking for support and debt relief to get through this. Additional monies, not debt, being grant money or very favorable loan money. But we don't have any choice. We can't have a situation where the economy totally collapses in Nigeria or the rest of Africa.
All right, Andrew, let's talk a little bit about conditional cash transfer. A lot of word has been said around as regards this. In America, for instance, that's the $1,200 you talked about for a family. Here, there's been word bandied around, even rumors about we having a certain level of conditional cash transfer. But the only thing the CBN has done really recently is to ease moratorium on a couple of loans and government-based loans and the likes. Is this the time to ease up on conditional cash transfer? Or to look at conditional cash transfer as a means of putting money in the pockets of Nigerians?
Well, I think it is the time, but I wouldn't even use the word conditional. I mean, as I said, in the United States, people are transferring, I think, $2,000 to every American adult. Forget the final number that came out of the Senate that President Trump signed. I mean, we don't need the word conditional in this. What we need to keep the economy going is cash in the hands at the bottom of the pyramid. And of course, the cash in the hands, they're not going to hoard the cash. They're going to go out and use it mainly for feeding, for health care, for their daily necessities. And that will keep the economy going. So I don't think there's anything wrong with having, let's call them cash transfers. I think the question for the central bank and the federal government, of course, is what's the best mechanism to do that? But if you look at it, the thing that, of course, we have in abundance are mobile phones. And there has to be some mechanism that we can use the mobile phone system to get money into the hands of the bottom of the pyramid in Nigeria.
Well, the CBN has done a lot and is doing a lot at this time. But let's look at the fiscal side of it. We saw that special committee put in place by the president, looking at the effect of coronavirus on the budget, for instance, the 2020 budget. Revised downwards the benchmark, $30. But when you look at oil prices, even this morning, they are scary. And we might not have seen the bottom of it, like Mr. Melo Kyari said a couple of weeks back, the NNPC GMD. Do you think $30 was realistic? What are your fears concerning the 2020 budget as we speak?
Well, I think, remember, if oil is $25 or $22, effectively that means there's no, because it costs money to take oil out of the ground and different fields have different costs. But if oil is at $25 or less, I'm not sure there's any flow from the NNPC to the Federation account, which means that there's no flow to the states, that there's no flow from oil to the federal government. That's the kind of fiscal pressure that we're under. That's why I started by saying the number one thing we need to do is go and source alternative funds, particularly from the IMF, and I don't think we should have any qualms about doing that at this point in time, because this is a fiscal emergency for the country. That said, the total budget deficit still relative to the GDP is quite small on that. And I do think that by tapping these other sources, by keeping the diaspora funds flowing, we can continue to have the economy function. But let's make no mistake, particularly the states are going to be under enormous pressure in a month or so.
All right, real quickly, Andrew, you talked about cash transfer, but let me take you way back to the 70s. Milton Friedman will always call this helicopter money, and we know the after effect of this sort of helicopter money on the economy. Do you think if we start to give that kind of, helicopter money, is not going to ramp up the what we have, the debt profile we have that we're already complaining about?
Remember, when we say helicopter money, I mean the central bank, the monetary authority has the right, that's what they're given, the right to create money. They can create money without creating debt. The question is, if you create that money, is it going to lead to higher inflation or even hyperinflation? That's always been the concern. I guess I would argue at the present time, the velocity of money, which is a technical economic concept, but it's essentially collapsed. No one is spending money anymore. Anyone that has money is holding it and only spending it for necessities. And the bottom of the pyramid, the people, or the day laborers, are not receiving any money. Under those conditions, if you create money and give it directly to the bottom of the pyramid, then I don't think it leads to higher inflation. What it leads to is higher aggregate demand, which increase production, particularly around the agricultural products on that way. So I think in the circumstances, I don't think there's an argument that says this kind of helicopter money that Milton Friedman was critical of is going to lead to higher inflation or to hyperinflation.
Well, Dr. Andrew Nevin, we'll go on a quick break now. When we return, we'll be looking at perhaps the worst-case scenario for Nigeria, the responses of businesses and individuals to this crisis. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Morning Show here on the Rise News. Dr. Andrew Nevin, partner and Chief Economist, PriceWaterhouseCooper Nigeria, is still with us in the studio. Thank you so much for staying with us, Dr. Nevin. I asked you, I mentioned before that break, with all of these given circumstances and this invisible enemy everybody's trying to fight, in fact, the president put it as a war situation. What is worst-case scenario economically for Nigeria? Is that recession inevitable? I'm talking about businesses because we do know we cannot leave this to government alone. Is it too late for businesses to sort of survey the impact this will have? And if it is not, what would be your advice to businesses to plan for the impact of coronavirus, even after coronavirus?
Well, the worst case, I think I don't even want to contemplate the worst case. But as I said a little earlier in the show, when we look around what's going to be the raw GDP numbers in the second quarter in developed countries that we can see already, it's likely to be down perhaps -10 to -15%, certainly -5%. Is Nigeria going to enter a recession? I mean, the Honorable Minister of Finance said, I think on Friday, that if this goes on for 6 months, we'll certainly be in a recession. So I think people should prepare for that. I mean, obviously the fiscal situation caused by the oil shock as well. So I think for businesses, businesses that I'm familiar with, our clients, they've already been preparing. I mean, people are not unaware of what's been going on the past 2.5 months on this issue, and businesses have already reacted. But that said, I think most of the senior business people, if not all of them in Nigeria, are starting from the viewpoint that the most important thing they can do is protect their people, protect their communities. They're not so concerned about profit and loss at the moment. They're concerned more about the human element, the health element, and doing everything they can to prevent COVID-19 from going out of control in Nigeria.
All right, Andrew, another point, a school of thought. A lot of people have been calling for QE, quantitative easing. In fact, I think at the colloquium celebrating the 68th birthday of Senator Bola Ahmed Tinubu, he talked about printing money to be able to, meet our demands now. Is this a time for QE for Nigeria, quantitative easing?
Money. So if we distinguish, people have sometimes different definitions. I think of QE, quantitative easing, as where the central bank buys securities essentially to drive down interest rates and ease monetary conditions. Of course, we've seen in Europe interest rates go below zero. Helicopter money to me is more of a direct transfer, particularly in this context, to the bottom of the pyramid. I'm advocating here, both policies can be useful, but the helicopter money policy is a bit more radical, but it's a more direct way to put spending power in the bottom of the pyramid. The traditional QA, where you buy up, the central bank buys up assets, is a more indirect way. And I think in the circumstances and the urgency of the economic situation, the more radical helicopter money option is called for, and that the traditional QE isn't going to have fast enough, or the transmission mechanism to the bottom of the pyramid isn't going to be strong enough or fast enough to prevent widespread problems with people who don't have enough money to buy food.
Well, that takes me to my next question of the informal sector, Andrew. What are the likely impacts we're going to see on this businesses, on this sector? Would it be any different from the impacts that will be witnessed by the corporates and the major businesses? And if not, what are we likely to see generally?
You've already seen, if you think of because we have such a large informal sector, the numbers look a little bit different. But in the United States, I think you had 3.3 million jobless claims last week in 1 week. And to put this in historical perspective, since they're keeping records, the highest weekly jobless claims before was less than 900,000. So this was in 1 week about 4 times that size. So we're obviously having that same impact here as cities are locked down, as Lagos is locked down, as Abuja is locked down. So, we don't necessarily, it's hard to measure unemployment, but we must have millions and millions of people whose source of livelihood is essentially dried up in the space of 2 weeks. And that's why it's so urgent for the country as an economic response to have not only some of the mechanisms that have been put in place by the CBN so far, and we have the bill in the House about some movements, but things that get cash directly into people's hands. And if you think about this, the way this debate is played out elsewhere in the UK and the US, that was what was really critical. It wasn't necessarily, tax relief for some businesses was important, but it was getting getting cash into the hands of people that suddenly found themselves unemployment. That's been the biggest political issue and the biggest economic stimulus that those countries have done. And we need to be in the same situation here in Nigeria.
All right, I've got 2 quick questions. Number one, Andrew, is there any rapid policy you might suggest as regards housing policy at a time where they're saying we should be locked indoors, but we have a housing deficit of over 18 million? Also, I wanted to reassure a lot of business because of the psychological impact. Only recently we heard the news that the economy minister of the state of Hesse in Germany, the state that has the biggest financial district in Germany out of Frankfurt and the likes, committed suicide, mere just thinking of how to get out of the economic mess when all of this dies down. So those 2 questions, Andrew.
Sorry, Rufai, it's been a little bit of noisy when you said. Let me answer the second question about the incident in Germany, and then please repeat the first question. I was very saddened to hear about the suicide of the finance minister in, not the national one, the state one in Germany. He was concerned about finances. I guess my counsel will be at this time, what's happening around the world is beyond money. We will get through this crisis if we do the right things health-wise, if we do the right things economic-wise, but we need to do things that take care of all of the population right now. And there is a solution to it. Already Italy is talking about it's going to need something like the Marshall Plan, similar to the Marshall Plan at the end of the Second World War, to rebuild as they come out of the COVID-19 crisis. So please, I don't think people should be overly focused on debt levels, on that. They should be focused on making sure that everyone is getting enough resources so that they can feed themselves, that there's enough health resources, that we're flattening the curve, that we're doing our social distancing. Those are the things to think about right now. I really don't think we should be concerned about kind of normal economics at this point in time. And please repeat the first question. It was a bit, just because we're doing social distancing, we're not in the same room.
The first one, and thanks for repeating that, Andrew, that's what we're observing here. The first question is, a lot of people, the lockdown starts 11 p.m. tonight. A lot of people will have to stay in their homes in a country where we have a housing deficit of close to 17, 18 million. Should there be any drastic policy movement as regards that, at least to get people to be able to have lockdown in homes, not on the bridges and the streets of Lagos?
Well, I can't comment on health policy. What I can say is around the world, social distancing, the lockdowns, countries that have used them well seem to have been very successful. If I look at Canada as an example, any number is too many, but so far we've only had 65 deaths. The social distancing, of course, is working for Canada. Our own Prime Minister had COVID-19, has come out of that. So, I mean, certainly in Lagos, Professor Akin Abayomi, very capable hands. This is his specialty. He's been on top of this for a long time. So my personal view is, whatever advice is coming out of the Minister of Health and coming out of the Commissioner for Health for Lagos, I will be following it. All Lagosians should be following it to stay as safe as they can in these difficult circumstances. We also have to recognize that the conditions in Nigeria are more difficult than some other places in terms of the density of people, access to water to be able to wash your hands frequently. Those are certainly challenges that we need to deal with.
Right, Andrew, what I was saying was housing. Should there be a rapid move by government on housing? I mean, there are a lot of unoccupied buildings here and there in Lagos. Should government be able to push and say, okay, let's get people into those homes? Since we are on lockdown now, we have 18 million housing deficit, 18 million homes. And that's not just available now. So should we have a rapid policy on housing?
That's a hard thing for me to comment on. I mean, that operationally, I'm not sure how that would work. I'm sure, I mean, we could certainly use the housing that we have more optimally. If there was a policy of trying to move people to unoccupied housing, I don't quite know how that would work in such a short term, because of course it's not enough just to move to an unoccupied housing. The house needs to have furniture, et cetera, and so I can't really comment on that policy. I'm not sure if it's been suggested yet, but I do want to go back and say, we've repeated this number, 17, 18 million housing deficit. I don't think, and we're going to do some new analysis, I actually don't think that's accurate in Nigeria, because of course, if there's 5 people per household, it would tell you there's 85 million people that don't have housing, that are homeless in Nigeria. So that's not really accurate. What we have is a situation where we have a large amount of substandard housing. Housing that are in slum conditions, that don't have adequate infrastructure, adequate water for them. But I don't think we should be repeating the 17 million housing deficit number.
Okay, very quickly, Dr. Nevin, is it too early to start to talk about lessons to be learned in the Nigerian situation?
Is it too early? I mean, I think it is too early. I think we should be concentrating on dealing with the health and the economic crisis that we have at hand. As I said, very disappointed, very saddened to see the suicide in Germany, someone worrying about the debt levels. I don't think that should be our concern at this time. It's coming out of this. I mean, I do think there will be lessons learned. I think that one thing that's going to be very interesting globally is to see if there's a change in values, because I think that, I mean, obviously what's happened makes people think about what's important to them, whether our consumer society in the West is something that we should continue, our connectivity to other people. So there's some people that say, this is going to be a V-shaped event from an economic perspective. We're going to bounce back, have rapid growth. I'm not so sure. I think there's going to be a lot of reflection, certainly in Western countries, about what this actually means for the way we should run economy and the society. But I'm not sure today is the time for that reflection, and particularly here in Nigeria and Africa, we have such urgent challenges because of the unique conditions here. I think we should have 100% focus on being able to minimize the health and economic impact of COVID-19.
That's a good place to leave it. Thank you so much, Dr. Andrew Nevin of the PwC, for coming on the Morning Show today.